All right, good afternoon and welcome to FCC's workshop on narrowbanding. I'm Jamie Barnett, the Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. I appreciate you braving the weather to be here. We've often tried to think of ways to up our viewership on the webinar part of it, and I think having a major snowstorm is a way to do that. But for those of you who actually came to be in the room with us, thank you for being here. I will say this, we had scheduled this to be from 1 to 4:30. We are going to shorten that to 1 to 3, so if everybody would talk really fast. It's not something I do very well, but we'll try and get you out of here so in the interest of public safety. Narrowbanding is a high priority issue for us because of the January 2013 narrowbanding deadline. It's really approaching very fast now. The significance of the 2013 narrowbanding deadline should not come as a surprise to anyone. The Commission paved the way for the land mobile radio licenses to begin the narrowbanding process in the 1990s and set the January 2013 deadline all the way back in 2004, 7 years ago. The Commission set this deadline years in advance to provide ample time for the development of narrowband capable equipment and to provide LMR licensees with ample notice and time to plan for the transition as part of their normal equipment replacement cycles. As a result, many public safety LMR licensees have already narrowbanded their systems or have purchased equipment that can easily be switched to narrowband operation before the deadline. However, life is never quite that simple. It has been said that a perfect method for adding drama to life is to wait until the deadline looms large, and it's starting to do so now. The adage appears to describe where many licensees are now. Our licensing records indicate that most public safety LMR systems still have not migrated to narrowband operation. Now, while some of those licensees may have plans in place to meet the deadline, we are concerned that many others are not so well prepared. Moreover, many of these licensees need to make significant system upgrades, including possible purchase of new radio equipment, including in order to complete the narrowbanding process. I'd also like to note that this issue is not limited to public safety. The narrowbanding requirement applies to non-public safety government entities that operate LMR systems, many of whom will face similar challenges. So make no mistake, the task ahead of us in the next 2 years is enormous and time is of the essence. For licensees that are confronting this challenge, I want to underscore several essential points. First, do not expect the Commission to extend the January 2013 deadline. The deadline has been in place for many years and has consistently been supported by the public safety community. Timely completion of narrowbanding is important to improve the quality of public safety radio service, ensure interoperability, and free up additional spectrum capacity. Second, licensees that have not prepared for narrowbanding need to focus on this now. Successful completion of the process requires careful planning and in many cases procuring funding well ahead of time. Waiting until the last minute will not work and could put you at risk of being in violation of our rules come January 2013. Third, a word about waivers. Some licensees have asked whether they can obtain waivers of the deadline. Keep in mind that any waiver request must meet a high standard based on unique circumstances, and that these requests are not routinely granted. So if you are concerned about meeting the deadline, the first thing you should do is contact us so that we can learn more about your particular situation and discuss possible options. That's one of the main reasons we're putting on this workshop, to help licensees find the tools and resources they need to complete this process on time. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists who are here today, including our federal partners, DHS's Office of Emergent Communications and the Department of Justice, as well as state representatives. We're also pleased to have participation from manufacturers and industry associations today. We hope that today's workshop will provide input for licensees on steps that they can take to facilitate their narrowbanding transition. At the FCC, we've taken a number of steps to help facilitate narrowband transition. With the help of our colleagues in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and the Office of Engineering and Technology here at the Commission, we've created a new web page devoted to narrowbanding, and we have an email box specifically devoted to narrowbanding questions. So if any licensees have specific questions, we encourage you to ask any member of our narrowbanding team. We are here to help you in the transition, and while we won't know, I'm sure it may be painful at times and will not be a pain-free process, we do know that by working together we can make it as painless as possible. Again, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, either in person or on the web. We recognize the importance of this issue to the land mobile radio community and appreciate your interest. Now I'd like to turn the podium over to Roberto Mussenden and Tracy Simmons from our Policy Division and for presentations on narrowbanding. Thanks, Roberto. Thanks, sir.
Good afternoon. Just before I begin, I'd like to thank our panelists and everybody attending. We are going to be pressed for time, so I'm not going to go through my presentation in depth, only to note that it is on the web, on our web page, and it's available for downloading. A lot of the details that we cover in this presentation will be covered in greater depth by our panelists. So I'm going to go quickly through this. It's essentially the basics, which were what a narrowbanding is, what are the deadlines, some general information on how licensees can prepare, the how to modify your license, which Tracy Simmons will actually detail in much greater detail, and then some additional information resources to get more information, including information about possible some grant opportunities. I'm going to just quickly go through this. The timeline is a very good graphical representation of when the original, I guess the idea back in the early 90s to actually begin to reform the spectrum, and then from there in 2004 we actually put the deadlines in place. So there's the interim deadline, which is in place now, which affects licensing, and then there's the upcoming deadline, which require by 2013 compliance with the narrowband rules. The only thing that I want to get to is the website and the contacts. That's my email address up there and my direct dial. Also, my colleague Zenji Nakazawa. I would say probably in many ways the quickest way or the most efficient way is to use the narrowbanding email box there, narrowbanding@fcc.gov. That way, if we have information or I need to refer questions to other members of the commission staff, sometimes I will have to talk to OET if it's an equipment issue or certification issue, or if it's a non-public safety licensee and they have specific questions, I will often ask for help from my colleagues at WTB. So that's usually the most efficient method of getting your questions. And also, because of the truncated nature of today's event, many of the Q&A times will probably suffer. So if you have questions that ordinarily you would refer via the web, if we don't get to you, feel free to go ahead and send them to the mailbox. Here are some other web pages that have developed and have sprung up that also deal with this. And a lot of these will be tailored towards your particular focus, whether it is in the transit or through the various frequency coordinators. The federal resources, we have DHS, OEC has information. FEMA also has, and some of these are ability for grants. The DOJ also has some limited grant opportunities. So with that, if we can pull up Tracy, we can get to Tracy's presentation.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's pull up the PowerPoint. Okay. I'm sorry I was not able to attend in person today. My presentation is on licensing and the narrowband requirement. If you still have questions after my presentation, you can reach me by email at tracy.simmons@fcc.gov or call me at 717-338-2657. Next slide. Adding narrowband emissions to your FCC land mobile license is not that difficult. Today I will show you how easy it is to file a modification using the ULS License Manager. The application example I am demonstrating shows you how to modify your wideband emission without frequency coordination. Modifications that reduce the bandwidth and also change the emission from analog to digital will need to be submitted to a frequency coordinator. Okay, next slide. Okay, open your internet browser to ULS website wireless.fcc.gov/ULS and click on the online filing. You'll need your FCC registration number and password to start the process. If you have any problems accessing the online filing system, please contact our ULS support at 888-225-5322. Next slide. Okay, as an example, I'm using a copy of call sign WQGL 938, licensed to the County of San Diego. This land mobile license has an analog and digital wideband emission. It is important to identify if one of these emissions is incorrect. The modification will need to be submitted to an FCC certified frequency coordinator. Only modification applications that reduce the bandwidth will be processed and granted by the FCC without frequency coordination. Next slide. This is the license manager screen you will see after you select online filing. Okay, next slide. Once inside License Manager, your screen may vary from what is shown. Start with clicking on My Licenses, then choose the license you want to modify, and then click on Update. This update link will allow you to update your administrative information and some technical information on your license. Next slide. The Select Update screen allows you to select the information on your license that you want to update. By selecting Technical Data, you automatically be able to update all the administrative information along with the technical data. Next slide. The Application Information screen requires that you answer all the standard FCC Form 601 main form questions. Note the application purpose is modification. If you have any fee questions, please call our ULS support, but most public safety can select yes to application and regulatory fee exemption. Failure to correctly answer the fee questions could result in a fee and cause your FRN to have a red light problem in the future. Next slide. The application screen is in place. You can update your address and contact information if necessary. Changes to your entity name will result in a special condition being placed on your license. Next slide. Next, you will need to review and answer the questions on the ownership screen. Next slide. Please read the general certifications and sign with the appropriate name. Remember, consultants or contractors are not authorized to sign under the FCC rules. Next slide. The control point screen is included only to show you have the option to update the information on your license. Next slide. The eligibility and activity field should be completed before going to the next page. Next slide. Any attempt to change or correct the location information will be considered a major modification, and the application will be dismissed if submitted without frequency coordination. Next slide. Like the location screen, any change to the antenna information will be considered a major modification, and the application will be dismissed if submitted without frequency coordination. Next slide. We finally arrived to the frequency screen that will allow you to modify the authorized emission. As described on the slide, you'll need to click on the location, then antenna, and then finally frequency to show the emission. Once the emission is selected, you will have the option to add, delete, or modify the emission. Next slide. If you're only replacing the wideband emission with a narrowband one, then use the modify emission option. The emission bandwidth, 11.25 kilohertz, can be represented as 11K2 or 11K3. Remember to click on Save Emission when done. Next slide. Instead of modifying your emission, you may also delete your wideband emission, then add the narrowband emission using a two-step process. If you decide to keep your wideband emission until 2013, you can just add the narrowband emission and then file another modification at a later date to delete the old narrowband emission. delete the old wideband emission. Next slide. This slide shows the new narrowband emission 11KO F1D. The old wideband emission 20KO F1D that was deleted in the previous slide is still viewable. Next slide. After all the emission changes have been saved, you can check for errors and then click Submit. Next slide. If everything was accepted by ULS, you should see the application confirmation screen. Note the no application or regulatory fees are required information. Next slide. After you submit your application, you can query the ULS application search at wireless.fcc.gov using the newly assigned FCC file number. Next slide. Another way to search for your pending application is by typing the call sign into License Search and looking at the Admin tab for the pending application. Next slide. The application translog is an easy way to identify changes you are making to your license. Note the existing wideband emission 20KO F3E was changed to 11KO F3E compared to the two-step process using the add and then delete on the 20KO F1D. Okay, next slide. I just wanted to make everyone aware the FCC may attach a special condition to your license if it contains wideband emissions. Next slide. The license grant with only the narrowband emissions. Okay, next slide. If you have any questions, please send me an email or give our ULS support a call. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tracy. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Rich Reed from OEC, who will demonstrate their planning and basically their mapping tool.
Thank you, Roberto. Good afternoon, everyone. I was told that we need to make this quick. I'm going to try to consolidate this as much as possible, but there's a lot to get through. As Roberto said, I'm Richard Reed. I'm with the Office of Emergency Communications, and I am happy to be here to demonstrate our frequency mapping tool. I work for multi-jurisdictional communication services, and our focus is to help state and local and territorial public safety first responders achieve interoperability through several of our very focused programs. I'm the branch chief for the ICTAP program. It stands for the Interoperable Communications Technical Assistance Program. And I have a team of federal support staff and contracted support staff that travel across the nation assisting state and local public safety first responders solve interoperability issues and achieve their interoperability plans. Since our assumption of the ICTAP program in 2006, when our office was created, the state requested TA program was one of our most successful programs, and we allow states to request up to 5 prioritized services on a yearly basis at no cost to them. We produce a catalog, and there's 50-plus service offerings in that catalog. One of those services was a narrowbanding service offering. In 2010, 11 of the 56 state-requested TAs was for narrowbanding support. This gave our office the ability to really focus on this issue and spend some significant time and resources working with the states and learning about their problems and their approaches to narrowbanding. As we engaged this group of 11 requesters, we realized that independent of budget and independent of resources, which we all know we can do very little about right now, that everyone was having difficulties in similar issues. The first one was documenting the current status of licenses in their state, accessing the contact information and POCs for each license holder, and messaging the urgency for the narrowband decision makers. and sorting the license information by county, regions, cities, license holder, and so forth, whatever was their area of purview. As part of the narrowbanding service delivery, our teams began to deliver Excel deliverables, which were basic reports that were pulled out of the FCC licensing data and provided in a way that was sortable and customizable to the state, so it was easy for them to drill down through the data and get to areas that were of concern for them. We had a really fine response to this particular service offering, and the technical folks really liked the Excel because it was easy to sort and easy to manipulate and easy to get down to the areas they were concerned with, but it wasn't quite as effective as we had liked for decision makers. So with the advent of Google and Google Earth, we were able to export that data into a graphically mappable output and map the data directly onto the Google map and make it easy for people to visually see the statuses of their license. This was great for the 11 folks the 11 states that requested our services in 2010, but we tend to try to make good ideas and export them more broadly at the ICTAP program. So we spent a little extra effort and a little extra resources to develop an application that has an easy enough use graphic user interface so that public safety folks can actually run their own queries anytime they want and with any periodicity they want. So rather than going through a bunch of slides, I'm going to go through a couple and then we're going to get directly to the demo. The first thing is our goal is to provide a narrowband licensing status for agencies on their VHF and UHF narrowbanding process. The report in Excel lists all the information that's currently available in the FCC licensing database. You can sort by FRN, call sign, or frequency. And the information on the right is all as accurate as the information you would put into the FCC licensing database. Limitations. What doesn't it do? It speaks to the information in the licensing database, but it does not show activity or progress or planning. It only manages the data. So just be aware that when you see the data, it does not get beyond just the actual reporting of the license status. So with that, if there's any further questions, or if we skim through this demo very quickly just to save time for the panel members, you get to the tool through www.publicsafetytools.info, and you can contact myself and my team at oec@dhs.gov. When you type in the URL I just mentioned, it takes you to a portal, and the portal shows several of the actual tools that we've developed over the years. Some of you are familiar with CHASM, and we have, we're going to go to the narrowbanding license status tool. What pops up is a web page that we put out for everyone's use. And on the left-hand side, you have a query box. By the way, I'd like to state for everyone, I'm the branch chief and program manager. I am not the programmer or the developer, so if I can do this, you can all do this. On the left-hand side, you have a query box, and on the right-hand side, you actually have just a basic Google Earth mapping image. Across the top, you have a list of resources. You've got the home page, which brings you back to here. We're going to stay in the narrowbanding license status component. The frequency mapping tool is a similar tool, but it's more broad than just land mobile radio public safety frequencies. And then the FCC tab tells us, shows you where we get our source data. It just takes you directly to the FCC site where the data is found. I'm going to run a couple quick queries just so you see how the functionality works. Let's choose Ohio, because that's where I am from. You start out by choosing the state, and we'll see what kind of connectivity we have. The next drop-down box or selectable box is by county. So you choose the state, then automatically you get the counties associated with that state. There will be states, such in Ohio is one of them, where we've already done a narrowbanding workshop, and they've stated that they have a regional focus, whether it's a Homeland Security region, a FEMA region that they concern themselves with. So we built some regional queries into the tool. That's not the case for every state, but if you'd like them for your state, please reach out to us and we can make that happen for you. I'll choose region 1. The next selectable box is if you want to not go to a state or not go to a region, or if you want to select just a city, you can do that by hitting the correct city on this drop-down box. You can also choose whether you want to go UHF or VHF frequencies or UHF alone or VHF alone. So our goal is to be able to allow you to select and query the data that you're interested in. I'll do both in this case. Transmitter type, we can do fixed or mobile. Mobile is currently disabled. We're struggling with getting the Latin long for mobile, the mobile stuff squared away in the application. So I'm going to use fixed, and I'll go ahead and map the data at this time. It goes out, it queries the database, and this database is land mobile radio for public safety conventional trunked or conventional and trunked. There's also, and I'll show you whenever I get done mapping here. So a pop-up comes out and it says there's 1,400 locations to be mapped. We say OK. Now, the reason this is important, this is a very data-intensive application. So the larger area you search, the longer it takes to map. And as you see right here, it's Internet Explorer is telling us it's too big. We're going to let it just run the script and continue to run. If you're using Firefox or Chrome, they're much quicker browsers in this application, just to let you know. So, completed its query. That pop-up box lets Internet Explorer know that it's a lot of data and it's having trouble getting through it. It graphically maps the data on the right-hand side, and there's a pop-up that comes up over the search, the query box here, that shows the actual number of licenses per each category. So as any Google map, I can zoom in just by double-clicking, and I have the zoom box on the right-hand side, so you get more fidelity as you move in. I can also go back over and by clicking on each push pin, remove from the map or add to the map each transmitter type. So if you want to take all the narrowband and wideband transmitters out and all the narrowband licensed transmitters out, that's the current wideband only emission designators in the FCC database for that geographic region. The next functionality I'd like to show you is at the bottom, right where you hit map data, you can also run reports. And what I mentioned earlier was our narrowbanding service offering would go out and interface directly with that state and run reports for them and allow them to manage or massage the data in a way that's useful to them. We've automated that process, and what I've done is I've asked the system to go out and create an Excel document that I can now export and save to my drive and keep as a historic reference for that date and time. And I'll open that file for you now. So the first screen that comes up is an explanation table. It tells you what all the data means. The important item of interest is the report date. It's the date you ran the report and the date that we got the data from the FCC, so the last update. You'll use that to be able to measure the progress. The next tab is a regional result. This is region 1, and it shows the number of narrowband, wideband, and narrowband percentage by FRN, call sign, and fixed transmitter. Those percentages don't add up because the number of fixed transmitters, so you'll have multiple fixed transmitters per call sign and the number of call signs per FRN. So you can get to whatever data you're looking for and roll it up that way. We can go to the next tab, and that's every county that's in region 1 in Ohio. And it gives you the same data just by county. Then you have tabulated data. That's all the data that was just run in that query, and you can sort it by any of these top rows. So if you wanted to sort it by county, you can maybe it's turned off on this Excel. Normally, whenever you use Excel, you can actually just do a filter by whatever county you want, and I'm not sure why it's turned off on this. It's a read-only document here, I guess. One other thing I'll show you is if you go on over to the right, it's a tab of every county individually. So if you want to look at Allen County, this FRN, this call sign, the location address, the city of location, and most importantly, the POC, phone number, username, email address, it's all there. So if you have the need to drill down and reach out and make a call, we've found that the email address is probably the most updated information, far more updated than the POC name and even the phone number. The next document that comes up in the reports format is a KMZ file. This is the file you click on if you want to pull this information and display it on Google Earth. It's automatic. If you have Google Earth installed on your machine, you click on this, it will port that information right over to Google Earth, and then you can use all the Google Earth functions, measuring, you can zoom in, you can look at it, fly over it with an airplane, you can do all the Google Earth stuff. So let me show you just one other piece of functionality. Close this window, go down and reset the data. If you, for example, don't want to be tied to a geographic area, or you don't know the county, or you just want to look beyond state borders, beyond city borders, beyond county lines, you go to search box. You click on the search box and you take and you drag a box around a geographic place on the map. Hopefully this will work. It's always difficult when you're doing a live demo. I'm not sure what's going on. I apologize. Anyway, normally, if you're doing this outside the firewall, it will allow you to just select an area on the map, and the same data will pop up. And let me actually just refresh this and see if I can get it to work. Looks like I'm having firewall issues. Yeah, I am. Looks like the internet's down here. Yeah, it's not liking it now. I think it just logged me off, guys. The only thing I wanted to show you that when you can also go and include or exclude the FRNs on the tab. I'm not getting through. So I believe that concludes my demo. If there's any other questions, I'll be here for the rest of the day. You can also contact me at the OEC inbox. I apologize for that technical error. It looks like the FCC has blocked that site now that we've been out playing with it for a while. So again, Rich Reed and OEC@dhs.gov. Thank you very much.
Is this one live? Okay, good. So now we can move on to the first panel, which is the impact on licensees. And this panel is intended as an information exchange. There are a lot of licensees out there, so we try to get as broad a panel as possible to represent various aspects of the LMR community. So we have from the Joint Council on Transit Wireless, Barry Einzig, Ralph Haller, who's the chair of NIPSTIC, Chuck Jackson from Motorola. With us, we also have Jeff Johnson, who's also from the International Association of Fire Chiefs, past president, and Paul Patrick from National States Association of State EMS. We also have Farouk Latif from APCO with us on the phone, who will talk about some of the, from a licensing, a frequency coordinator methods. So with that, we're just going to go in order by last name. So Barry with an E goes ahead and leads us off.
To the podium?
Yes, and wherever you wish.
All right. Okay. You have a way to do it from there? Excellent.
We can get you the clicker. Or if you can.
Well, I'll go ahead and read my opening statement while you figure out the logistics on that. So while I am a Harris employee, I am here representing the Joint Council on Transit Wireless Communications in my capacity as chairman. Of that organization, the views expressed in my presentation and during the course of this panel do not reflect the opinions or viewpoints of Harris Corporation, just to clarify who I'm here to represent. Okay. There we go. Okay. And for anybody that would like more information, these are intended to be quick presentations, so I'll run through this rapidly, but transitwireless.org is our webpage if you'd like more information, or certainly if you'd like to volunteer.
We'll do the old-fashioned way.
Do it the old-fashioned way, okay. Thank you, Roberto. Okay, so a little bit about the Joint Council first. In 2009, we were established. Our vision is to be the collective voice of the transit community for wireless communication needs. It's our mission to assure that the transit industry's wireless communication needs are continuously met through information sharing. We were established at a Joint Council meeting, initial meeting at the APTA annual conference in Orlando, Florida in October of 2009. Next slide, please. We were founded under a TCRP Transit Industry Survey project, which was to survey wireless communication usage within the transit industry. That was the original intent. From there, we got about a 36% response rate from the transit agencies. And the key one of the key conclusions was that we needed to develop a strategic plan for the transit industry specifically that addressed wireless communication needs. From that, a next project was Develop TCRP Project C18. That project was to develop the strategic plan, and one of the goals of that strategic plan became we need to establish a joint council to be that continuing voice. So that was the next step in the plan. Next slide, please. From the survey itself, the original initiating document, it was no surprise to those in the industry. It may be a surprise to some outside of the industry, the high level of usage of two-way radio communications in the mass transit industry. If you look at the light blue bar on the left-hand side, those are the larger metropolitan agencies around the country, and it's almost 100%, no surprise there. But even down to the smallest agencies in the U.S., the ones that are the most difficult for us to reach, the usage is well in excess of 80%. And as you can see on the right-hand part of the chart, over almost 2/3 of all transit agencies are impacted by narrowbanding. Next slide, please. These are some of the activities that we have been involved in, and these are some of the pain points that we see transit agencies in particular have regarding their narrowbanding. Some of them are lack of in-depth knowledge by decision makers. You know, generally the folks in the radio shop know about the issue, but the organization at a higher level, the people that are actually in a position to make financial decisions do not. They have large planning horizons that are typically tied to reauthorization bills, so it's difficult for them to shift gears when they're not in the middle of a new authorization. They're generally very high usage of data applications, so intelligent transportation systems are a key part of these systems. So making those decisions on tech refresh or upgrades to those systems is a big part of it. And then, of course, like any other big public agencies, they have a ton of other issues that they have to deal with, whether it's reauthorization and planning for that and budgeting for that. Well, a new issue from 32 of the large commuter rail systems is a positive train control. The same skill sets, the RF comms are needed for the narrowbanding side as well as for the positive train control side. They're going through staff reductions, and they have the same local state fiscal crisis as others. Next slide, please. So we worked on several things in order to be able to do outreach and education inside the transit industry. The first is we worked with TRB to develop a quick study program. That's in process right now. It's a survey of the database in order to be able to identify all the transit agencies in the database. It's not as intuitive as it may seem, so this is an educated search, not just a blind search. in order to be able to gather all the information on their frequencies, where their status is, and most importantly, those points of contact so we can do outreach. We also have a webinar and an educational series we're doing through the NTI where we're educating transit agencies on the issues, and we're also developing a list for the commuter rail systems for interop at 160 for those narrowband systems. Next slide. I think that's it.
Thank you. Next is Ralph Haller from NIPSTIC.
Thank you very much. I'll just start on a personal note. Many of you know I was chief of the Private Radio Bureau here when we started refarming in 1991. I never expected to be back at the FCC talking about refarming 20 years later. But here we are, and something's finally happening on it. With regard to NIPSTIC, NIPSTIC is an organization of 15 public safety organizations and very involved in the narrowbanding effort. It's a topic at each and every NIPSTIC meeting. We think it's very important to try to get the word out. We also put a countdown timer on our webpage, right on the webpage, to make sure that anybody that looks at the NIPSTIC webpage is immediately alerted to the fact that they have so many days, hours, and minutes left before they have to be narrowbanded. We have an interactive map by state where people can click on that interactive map, and it will guide them to local resources that they can rely on to help them go through the narrowbanding process. We have links to a number of narrowbanding documents on the site, as well as links to other sites. We also have a questionnaire which is currently active. If I could have my slides. This is currently active, but I'm going to give you preliminary results, and this is a very high-level look at what we have so far. Next slide. On the questionnaire, we wanted to try to develop a snapshot of the current status of narrowbanding. And we had generally 9 areas in which we asked questions and looked for responses. We had over 600 responses to date, and it's still open, so as time passes, hopefully we will get additional responses. Next. First question was, is your system capable of narrowband? I probably should have entitled this, Are You Narrowband at this time? Many jurisdictions are narrowband capable, but they're still operating in the wideband mode for a number of reasons, including interoperability with adjacent jurisdictions. Repeaters and base stations pose a very big problem, even if the mobiles and portables are ready. Mobiles and portables have been replaced on a fairly regular basis, but the fixed infrastructure is there for years and years, and that needs to be replaced. Very few entities have completely converted. Most still need some equipment. We had some troubling comments as well, like, how would I know if I'm narrowband? Or the county commissioners aren't on board yet. Quite troubling given that we're less than 2 years out from the date. Next. Are you considering migrating to 700 or 800 megahertz? Mostly no. There are propagation issues with 700 and 800 megahertz that require a number of organizations to remain at VHF and UHF, as well as interoperability with neighbors, and the cost of the conversion to go to 700 or 800 megahertz, where you have to have a lot more fixed infrastructure for the same coverage. Next. Do you have a timetable? Most have a timetable, but many see funding as an obstacle to meeting that timetable, even if they would like to meet it. Next. Have you determined the cost to narrowband? We got a wide range here, from a few $1,000s to millions of dollars. It obviously depends upon the size of the jurisdiction, but in no case did anybody come back and say we can do it for free. Constant theme again, where is the money going to come from? Next. Are you planning to file for a waiver? Very undecided at this time. A number of entities said they're going to file. A number said, no, we're not going to file. We're probably going to make the time. Or we're doing something else. So I think this is a big area of concern because the Commission is not planning to grant waivers easily. So if people are thinking they're going to file a waiver, that's a problem. Next. Are you currently narrowband capable? We had ranges from no equipment is narrowband to everything is capable of narrowband. At this point, most entities have some equipment that's narrowband and some that's not, so they can't actually convert at this point. Next. Do you need to purchase equipment? Most will need to purchase additional equipment by 2013. Next. Have you identified funding? Many are looking for grants. Some have partial funding in place at this time. Organizations like volunteer fire departments need donations, or they need to do a lot of bake sales in order to make this happen because they don't have any other funding source. Funding is really the biggest obstacle to meeting the deadline. Last slide. Will narrowbanding affect interoperability? Generally, the answer was yes. Interoperability suffers if users are not all using the same technology. And communications range is also reduced as one goes to narrowband. So those two factors definitely affect interoperability. We'll have this completed later in the year, but I think this gives you a high-level look at where we stand right now and what the state of the conversion is.
Thank you. Next is Chuck Jackson from he's the Vice President of North American Government and Commercial Markets for Motorola.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing us to be here this morning. Could you bring up the slide deck, please? There's been a lot of talk about procrastination and people not getting on with narrowbanding, so we proposed one possible reason here. If you go to the next slide, please. Both the narrowbanding date and the Mayan calendar end at the same time. But we do have some good news. We've done some surveys and stuff that I'll share with you a little bit later. Next slide, please. So I've 4 areas to talk about, and the first couple I'm going to skip over most of it in the interest of time. So if you go to the next slide and the next one. This just talked about how this has been out for a long time, as Ralph mentioned, and then the next slide, please. The point I'd like to make here is the manufacturers have been manufacturing equipment that is narrowbanding capable since 1997. So equipment has been in there for a very long time, and as the chief mentioned earlier this morning, that equipment was meant to be out into the field and users purchasing that equipment from all the manufacturers. So as they do the normal replacement cycles, an awful lot of that equipment has been changed out already and is capable of moving to the narrowband channels. We've been providing equipment for 13, 14 years, along with all the rest of the people that manufacture equipment in the U.S. to be in compliance with the rules. Next slide, please. Next slide. All of the manufacturers have done a lot to try to get the word out. Conferences at IWC, APCO, any of the local, anytime we get a chance to talk about it, we do it. And we've put up a website, and I know several of the other manufacturers have, that list all of the equipment that is capable of being narrowbanded. So you can go to our website or your radio manufacturer's website, and there are lists of equipment up there, and this equipment is fine. It's capable of narrowbanding, and this equipment needs to be replaced. So you need to go there and check it, and as I talk about a little bit later, what you have to do to modify the systems. The first thing is you need to do an inventory of the equipment you've got to understand what needs to be replaced and what can go ahead and be reprogrammed for narrowbanding. Next slide, please. One more. So we took a look at this, and if you look at the number of licensees that need to be rebanded, it's 160,000. Call signs are 248. And the division here is about 1/3, 2/3. It's a third for public safety, and business and industrial make up the other 2/3. And we've, like Ralph, have done some surveys, and if you go to the next slide, this is some of the data that's been coming back. And it's somewhat encouraging, except the numbers are very, very large. So if you look at, so we surveyed 2,100 randomly selected licensees that indicated that they were still running 25 kilohertz systems. And if you look at this, 25% have said that we're narrowbanded, and we just haven't modified the license yet, which is pretty encouraging. 44% said we have plans in place, and we know what we're going to do, and we're looking for the things, like funding and such get that done. So they've, they have a path and they're going down that. And then 15% said they were aware but hadn't really done anything yet. And then there were about 16% that said they weren't aware, and the most of those tended to be in the business and industrial area. And you can understand that a lot of them, are maintained by shops, and maybe their servicer is aware, but they're not of what they've got to do because they take care of it. The next slide, please. This is looking at the top 300 licensees in public safety that are affected. Very high numbers here. 41% say that they are complete or in the process of getting complete, and another 47% say they have a plan in place, and only 18% of these larger public safety users said they really haven't decided what they're going to do yet. Next slide, please. Next one. So I want to talk just for a second about the major options that are available to licensees. One of them is obviously the easiest. That's going from 25 to 12.5 kC analog. The other one is moving to another band, and maybe not replacing your system, but what we're seeing in rebanding, not narrowbanding, is a lot of the agencies are joining either a regional system or a state system and bringing in some equipment to do that. And then the third is migrating to some of the newer technologies, TDMA or FDMA. Next slide, please. So if you're going to migrate your current system, the first thing I said, like I mentioned earlier, is you have to evaluate the subscriber fleet, do the license modification. And then the way you would do this is you reduce the deviation of the transmitter, then you go around and you adjust all of the subscribers, and then you would go in and narrowband the receiver, so it's kind of a three-step process, and then you'd validate that the operation is proper. And of course that's after you've replaced any subscribers that weren't narrowbanding capable. Next slide, please. There are alternatives, like I mentioned earlier. You can move to your own 700 or 800 or 900 meg system, but what we've seen is becoming more popular is people joining regional or statewide systems to to get interoperability and greater coverage. And then lastly, there's several FDMA and TDMA systems that meet the current FCC requirements. So if you think that the system's been in for a very, very long time, and now is the time to make that migration, that alternative is certainly available to you. Next, please. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. I guess Jeff Johnson, the past president of the IFC, and I understand we put some new hat on you.
We did.
You didn't have enough to do.
I didn't.
Okay, well, we appreciate you being here now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. In the interest of brevity and in the hopes that my message will appeal to all age groups, I thought I would start off by saying, dude, they really, really mean it. Narrowbanding has been no secret. The International Association of Fire Chiefs, who I represent, shipped out this pamphlet in 2006. We distributed this far and wide across this country, and fire chiefs have known about it and understood it since shortly after that period of time. But in spite of that, some people haven't done it. And what we're seeing is people have not done it. The more rural, the smaller it is, the higher the likelihood that they've yet to narrowband. And we are running out of time. There's some of these folks, God bless them for serving their communities in the way that they do. But the reality is that they believe either it wasn't going to apply for them, or they would have grant money available, or possibly the rule would be, the enforcement action would be delayed again. And the reality is I think that the grant money is still a possibility, but shrinking. And they intend to enforce the deadline, and I think they've consistently sent that message. So for my colleagues in the public safety community, I think we can quit looking for off-ramps and spend our time making sure that we become compliant. And there's plenty of resources, plenty of tools, and plenty of people that will help with that, but you have to take the initial step to get it done. I want to spend the last couple minutes of my time talking about what I see are the challenges out there. The first, I think, major challenge is for those people that aren't substantially complete right now, they're actually running into a choice of pitting the speed associated with simply narrowbanding against maybe a larger, more efficient an effective system design that could take longer. And we now have people literally having to make decisions about, well, maybe I'll just narrowband, and they're walking past maybe a better solution that would take a little more time. And then we start getting into some of the waiver questions, and I think those will be few and far between. We're also seeing situations where departments are waiting for their neighbors so that they can narrowband as a region. Because if one of them narrowbands, then you mess up interoperability, and it becomes a substantial barrier. So what we're seeing is the difficulty of moving a region forward so that you do not mess up interoperability is creating barriers, and now people are starting to break from the group and do what they have to do, and oftentimes leaving their neighbors. It is also a tough time economically. I think that's obvious to all of us. There are still elected officials and supervisors that do not believe that really there's a federal requirement that's going to require them to replace the radio equipment. And the reality is I think everyone has done their share to get this word out, but there's still more people to reach and more to be said on the topic. And I think lastly, there is a growing discussion caused by people that recognize that we're on the cusp of a technological revolution in the public safety community. And specifically what I'm talking about is, you know, we are nearing the likely logical end of land mobile radio as we know it, and we're approaching an age where radio over IP is likely the next generation. And there are people that want to have a pretty substantial dialogue about what it would mean if we just waited and what it would mean if. But the reality is, having been involved in many of these discussions, the equipment is not available today, these systems are not deployable today, and even if we agree that that is a logical conclusion the future will bring us, that isn't something here today. And we need to continue to have dialogue about it, but the reality is we need to deal with what's before us, and that means we need to narrowband. So thank you for the invitation.
With us on the phone is Farouk Latif, who is the Director of the Spectrum Management Division for APCO. Farouk, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to join the discussion. Most of what I have put in my presentation has been provided as feedback by our network of local advisors. APCO supports a network of almost 70 volunteer frequency advisors across the country. So with that, I'm going to the next slide, which is titled Narrowband Transition Licensing Update. And based on a query that we did back in December, and this is only valid for public safety pool of frequencies and licensees, we have identified about 70,000 licenses that still have not added the narrowband emission. This number could be lower as we're talking because we have seen many more applications come through most of the coordinators, and I'm sure a lot of folks are also taking advantage of ULS capabilities to submit their applications to add the narrowband emissions. But based on the query that we did, we have noticed that about 70% of licensees in Connecticut, and these are again examples. We're not trying to put the microscope on someone here, but these are just examples that 70% of licensees in Connecticut do not show narrowband emissions being added. California is not any better with 8,200 licensees, and Alabama, of course, with 2,200. And the numbers are not different than with other states, some better and some worse. And of course, there isn't solid records on implementation process. Next slide, please. Some of the issues and the impacts that has been reported to us are some of the licensees that have migrated to narrowband operations are reporting that they have to reprogram their radios numerous times as other adjacent agencies migrate, and this is certainly valid in interoperability channels. There's certainly a lack of communications among agencies when they're converting to narrowband, and also there's no way for another agency to know exactly when the other agency has narrowbanded. We're also getting reports out there from licensees that there's a lack of technicians, lack of qualified technicians, and the number of technicians that can help with this transition. Of course, everybody, I'm sure, has heard about some of the stories that are coming in about coverage and loss of both range and audio. And of course, that differs depending on geographical location and topography. And then, of course, the one thing that has been reported to us and everybody has been concerned about is lack of funding for this effort. Next slide, please. What has worked thus far is Illinois and Wisconsin in the early process. They made sure that the state interoperability executive committee councils are involved with the narrowbanding process. Of course, what they have done would only concern with interoperability channels and not the primary channels that local and state governments use. For example, Wisconsin has set a time frame for transition to narrowband for the interoperability, and Illinois has come up with a 4-phase migration plan. What APCO has also done is we have sent numerous, not only official letters to remind licensees of the upcoming narrowbanding deadline, but we have also done numerous presentations around the country during local APCO chapters and conferences. And actually, Roberto and I and several others did the presentation last year at IWCE as well. We have also sent email blasts, and what we found out on the last query that we did, of the 70,000 licenses that we identified that had not converted to narrowband, better than 60,000 do not have an email listed on their administrative record. So it's quite difficult to reach them, and it looks like we will have to start a letter campaign here, which would be a monumental task. Next slide, please. I'm sure most of you have seen this as it's been posted on APCO's website and many other websites, and I believe NEPSTEC also has the steps listed as how to go about transitioning. So I'm not going to bore anyone with going through this list. And of course, the next slide continues with the steps. One step that I have failed to include in here is actually the last step, and that would be to remove the wideband emissions from a license. And with that, I do thank everyone.
Thank you. But don't hang up, because we'll have some questions.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And finally on the panelist is Paul Patrick, who is the EMS and Preparedness Director for the National Association of State EMS Officials.
Thank you, and it is a pleasure to be here and talk to you today. One of the things that I put up oftentimes is this quote without the author. It says, "We live in the midst of alarms, anxiety beclouds the future. We expect some new disaster with every newspaper we read." And I have them try to decide who said that. It was said by Abraham Lincoln. How true it still is today. I'm going to talk and focus on what we do in EMS. We're so grateful to be part of the public safety community as we work with our fire and police and dispatch, and we bring public health into what we do, but I want to focus on just emergency medical services. And in the western region where I live, and Utah particularly, and some of the states that surround me, Utah, we're 96% compliant with narrowbanding. Arizona's developed an infrastructure, and they will be there in their EMS community by the 2013. Nevada is interesting because Nevada has always been two things for EMS. It's the state of Clark County or Las Vegas, and then it's the state of Nevada. And that's been the world that we've always lived with Nevada. But they've divided their state now into three. So you have Clark County and Las Vegas, and then you have the rest of the state as they're working towards that. And Idaho has been very progressive in the way that EMS has worked with their dispatch center and working towards that. Other things that we found, we noted there were some gaps as we looked at the western states. We did not include a lot of the dispatch agencies and a lot of the hospitals, and so we've gone back to help those agencies with narrowbanding and some of the funding sources that we have. EMS is a unique placeholder for all of us in public safety in that most EMS agencies, if they transport, have the ability to bill. And a lot of the states have the ability to collect from different sources revenue that they can share through the form of state grants. The other states in our region, Washington, Oregon, California, New Mexico, Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming, all gave similar reports. There are tools that we have used to help us in narrowbanding. For Tim Lowenstein, this slide is for you. We talked earlier about the suggestion in the box and outside of the box. We've used SafeCom mapping tools. We've coordinated with the state interoperability coordinators, or the SWICs, and we've used grant funding, both state and federal. In Utah, we had a partnership with our other partners as we worked out funding, and we used federal grant and state grants to help us narrowband. We were able to purchase equipment through some of our preparedness and EMS grants so that when a fire truck or an ambulance or a police car came on line, they got a new car, we had the narrowband radio ready, we just plugged it right in. And the Homeland Security and Public Safety Group dealt with the infrastructure, and they helped build the towers and do those things that were necessary to move us in that direction. It's been a great partnership and purchased a lot of equipment over maximizing some of our grant dollars. But then there's the next slide, which you'll see. Sometimes all we can do is wait for some kind soul to pull our rear end out of a bind we've gotten ourselves into. Poor dog, but he did get out. The obstacles that we have found with our agency are the cost of the agencies, tighter coordination between the users needed to avoid interference, relicensure, reduced coverage, in some cases up to 20%. In Utah, we lost 3 dBs when we went to narrowbanding, and that was resolved by putting amplifiers on the various sites, and we got that back. High band users will see a change in coverage. Not enough encouragement for regionalization. As others mentioned, this is not a single agency. It's not a one-at-a-time approach, but we need to continually transition between hospitals and ambulance agencies that frequently communicate and make sure this is a carefully choreographed process to minimize interference and the potential for interference when transferring a patient between jurisdictions. So here's our solution for EMS. We can keep going and not look over our shoulder because somebody might be gaining on us. But that's not our solution. Our solution is my last slide. Our real solution in narrowbanding is to work together to accomplish our goals so that we can provide a narrower bandwidth in order to gain more channels from the same amount of frequencies. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess to kind of get things going, I actually would like to ask our panelists what would consider the major misconceptions about narrowbanding. Go ahead.
I think there's a number. One misconception is that I'm going to get twice the number of channels if I narrowband. Another major misconception is I will become secondary if I don't narrowband. Probably those are the two biggest ones, but the one that keeps coming back, and I don't know if this is a misconception, but I'll characterize it that way. Well, if I don't narrowband, the FCC won't do anything to me anyway. And I think that's an issue that needs to be discussed. What is the Commission going to do if agencies, be they businesses or governmental entities, simply don't narrowband? What's going to be the penalty other than just saying you're not operating in compliance with your license?
This is Pharaoh. I would also echo what Ralph just said, and that's one of the misconceptions that we have heard is that when it comes to 2013, there will be more channels available, and that is not accurate by any means. In VHF, that would be an impossibility, whereas in UHF, the coordinators will be able to pack more users in due to non-overlapping of spectrum.
I guess when we've gotten numerous questions on the what happens, I have a friend who says he's not going to narrowband. What should I tell my friend? And your friend won't be in compliance with the Commission's rules. That means that they don't receive interference protection. There is the real possibility of enforcement action, which is where it leaves the friendly confines of WTB and PSHSB and it wanders over to the Enforcement Bureau. So I have no insight into that bureau. I mean, we interact professionally, but I do not. So that becomes their decision. The other aspect of it is an enforcement action is very similar in some ways to a, say, criminal investigation. There has to be a complaint. The complaint has to be investigated. A determination will have to be made, is a violation, did it occur? And then there's going to be an assessment of what should the appropriate penalty be. During each of those phases, the licensee is not engaged in their core purpose, whether it's engaged in business for our commercial licensees, protection of safety of life, property, for public safety issues. You are spending time, energy, and resources interacting with the FCC. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is during the Enforcement Bureau usually takes into consideration mitigating and aggravating factors in terms of assessing compliance. So willful non-compliance with the agency's rules is probably not going to be viewed very favorably. Let's just leave it at that. And there, you know, as folks have mentioned, not compliance, especially when you're dealing with interoperability issues, it's actually, you're not just harming yourself, you're actually other agencies or entities that rely upon you in an interoperability relationship, you are actually maybe putting them at risk as well. So I think these are all aspects that need to be looked at from a from what do I do, what are the possible implications if I don't comply.
Berto, if I could add one detail to that. Another question that we get asked, particularly from the railroad community and the commuter railroads, is do we need to go straight to 6 1/4?
We get that one a fair amount into the inbox as well. And their rules are out there that say at some point we will move to 6 1/4, but that date hasn't been established yet. And that date will not be established except through a notice and comment proceeding. So it will not sneak up on anyone. There will have to be an NPRM proposing a date, time for licensees and other affected entities to propose, to comment on any proposed dates, and then at that point, the Commission will have to take the, basically issue an order establishing a date. So I would say, 12 1/2 is the firm date, 6 1/4 is not, the date hasn't been established, and there will be plenty of time, and the Commission will take all what we've learned from moving from 25 to 12 1/2. I'm pretty sure the Commission will take this into account when we move to establish a date for 6 1/4.
If I might mention one other thing where there's, I think, a misconception. A lot of licensees believe that the move to narrowband means they have to move to digital. And that's been, there's a number of reasons why that's the case, ranging from manufacturers wanting to sell digital equipment to simply not understanding what narrowbanding is. I think it's important that whether it's the Commission or NIPSTIC or anybody else that's involved in trying to advise the community on what's required, that they need to understand this is not a required move to digital.
One thing that you pointed out as one of the misconceptions is that users will not get twice as many channels as they now have. So what would be, how would you describe the benefits of narrowbanding for either for an individual licensee or just the community at large?
Boy, nobody wants to answer that one.
I think they just did.
So I think one of the things that I've heard is that essentially you're actually creating by, you're actually kind of cleaning up the spectrum. Your neighbors will be a little bit farther away, that you won't have as much adjacent channel.
Well, that would be, this is fair, Latif, that would be valid in UHF, as I mentioned earlier, but because the way that the band is laid out in VHF, I don't believe that would be, there would be any improvements, unless everybody would want to go to technologies such as P25.
Well, I think I agree that there's going to be some improvement, but it's going to be minimal. And I guess in terms of spectrum that you pick up, you really have to go back and look at the history of how the spectrum was licensed. Initially, the channels, I won't go back to where there were 50 kilohertz channels, but at 25 kilohertz channels, it was always possible to license the interstitial channels at 12.5 kilohertz with a 25 kilohertz signal, but that was done with geographic separation. So if an entity was licensed on a primary 25 kilohertz channel, the coordinators could authorize a 12.5 kilohertz offset at some distance, 10 to 15 miles away. And so those channels that you would think would now become available because they're being created really aren't being created. There's been people on them for a very long time. They've just been wideband. And that's why you're not seeing a 2-for-1 improvement in spectrum efficiency here, because those channels have been used many, many, many years, but with geographical separation as opposed to frequency separation.
So would it be possible then to coordinate, I guess, licensees closer to each other as you clear up? I mean, is there any gain in spectrum?
In UHF, yes. I mean, again, we will be able to pack more users in at much closer distances. And we have been doing that, by the way, for the past, I don't know, 6-7 years, because there isn't any wideband frequencies available in the country, in most parts of the country, I may add. And so coordinators have been forced to assign narrowband operations on wideband channels. And with that, there isn't much consideration for 12.5 kilohertz adjacent licensees.
I guess on an also practical aspect, for many licensees out there who may be unfamiliar, I mean, what if you're going to retune a radio? How involved is this? How time-consuming is it? Both whether it's let's say on an individual mobile or a portable, and in terms of a base station, how much, in terms of trying to allocate time or build a schedule, how would that work?
Well, the majority of the equipment is computer programmed anymore, and there's actually a checkbox, and you go from narrow, from wide, and you check the narrow, and then some of them allow you to check the bandwidth of the receiver IF. So, you know, the largest amount of time in anything like this is collecting the equipment, getting the radio out of the car, getting it on the bench. But once you've got it on there and set up and connected to the computer and the test equipment, it's very, very quick. You just go to the page and check the box. So someone that's got an annual maintenance program or runs their radios routinely through a service facility or their own service facility, you can do this in just, you know, a very, very short amount of time as that goes on. Now, if you got to go collect all the units, I mean, anybody that's been involved in rebanding or any big system change-outs, you know, that's always, you know, a logistical challenge is, you know, getting someplace where people can go to get the radios changed or finding all the units and stuff. But the actual amount of time spent to you know, modify the radios is pretty quick.
If you have a fleet of 500 units, you can't convert them overnight. And so one challenge is, how do you convert that fleet and keep everybody talking to each other during the process of the conversion? And if you happen to be lucky enough to have radios where they will accept over-the-air programming, that's a pretty easy answer. But if you do have to touch each box, then during the course of the transition, part of your fleet's going to be narrowband and part of your fleet's going to be wideband, and that's going to create interoperability issues.
Yeah, you know, because of time, I went through those slides pretty quick, but what we're recommending is you reduce the deviation of the transmitter, you know, the base transmitter, and then a non-narrow-banded receiver will have to turn the gain up on, you know, the volume control up on the radio, and what you'll have is that radios have been narrow-banded will sound lower, and ones that are wideband will sound louder. So there'll be a period where you can you know, you're going to have to adjust the volume control. And then we also recommend that you don't touch the inbound receiver until everybody's done, because you don't want to narrow the receiver up and then have a wideband transmitter. That would create a lot of distortion and range issues. So you leave the receiver wideband and the transmitter narrowband until you do the entire subscriber fleet. And then you've got an issue of changing volumes as you work through the 100 units, or some system thousands of units. So it is an inconvenience, and there are some issues with it, but you know, you can work through it. And then once you've finished all the subscribers, you go back and you narrowband the inbound receiver on your repeaters or your base station, and at that point, you know, it'll sound like it did before.
A little more challenging in the transit environment, Roberto. I think particularly when you get to larger agencies, there are two operational challenges. Fundamentally, it's access to the equipment. Most bus operations only allow their buses to be off the road for about 3 hours in the middle of the night. So everything's done on overtime. It's done at a much more expensive rate. And, of course, it's the same staff that has to come in and operate the maintenance systems during the day. The other challenge is in an operating railroad environment, whether you're in a subway system or you're on a wide area railroad environment, the logistics of getting out there, retuning the system is much more cumbersome and expensive. And then the final piece I would add to that is in a bus environment where they already have an ITS CAD-AVL system, the onboard computer is actually functioning as the control head. So all of your IOs have to be reprogrammed. In some cases, they're incompatible. So there's a larger logistic challenge inside of a bus environment that's using CAD-AVL equipment.
This is Pharaoh. I believe that you know, programming portables and mobiles can be done fairly quickly based on a plan. But more importantly is the infrastructure, which cannot be done quickly. Is there needs to be a transition plan which does not affect the user and his coverage and reliability.
In the interest of time, unfortunately, we are going to have to end this panel, and so that the second panel can have some time before we have to shut down operations for the day. But I would like to thank our panelists again, and the licensees, and thank everyone who attended and folks who attended on the web. As you can see, there's a lot of interest. We are here at the Commission to try and help everybody come through this. As I said, you have my contact information, we have the web page, and any information that we can get to you or any help we can do, we're here to help. So, again, thank you for your time. So we're going to take about a 2-minute break while we switch panelists.
Okay, we have about a half an hour left, so we would like to try to get as much as possible of our second panel in under our weather emergency here. I'm David Firth. I'm a Deputy Chief in the Public Safety Bureau, and our second panel is going to be dealing with budgetary and funding issues relating to narrowbanding. As I think we heard from the first panel, the question of funding is a recurring question for those who have very large systems and for those who have very small systems alike. So we have a good panel, and we'll try to get through as much of this as possible. Just a couple of program notes in case we run out of time at the end and need to shut down quickly at 3. I would first of all like to thank the support staff that have been making this panel and workshop run so smoothly, especially under difficult circumstances. Susan McLean, Deborah Klein, DeAndrea Wilson, who has been ably managing the slides for everyone, and Joanne Smith, who is dealing with the web. I'd also like to thank our interpreters for keeping up with this as we talk fast, and our apologies. So with that, let me quickly introduce our panelists, and then we're going to go to a short set of presentations. We'll try to have some time at the end for questions. For those of you who are here in the audience, we do have a microphone here if you have questions, and then for those of us who are linked in on the web, you can submit questions to us by email. We will probably, given the time, not be able to get to every question, but obviously if you have questions that we don't get to, you can send them to our narrowbanding mailbox. We have 4 panelists here to talk about budgetary and funding issues. Steve Devine, who is the Interoperability Program Manager for the Missouri Department of Public Safety. Tim Lowenstein, who's representing the National Association of Counties and is also the head of the SAFECOM task force that's been looking at narrowbanding issues. Dan Fithian, who is the Director of Policy Planning and Analysis at the Office of Emergency Communications at DHS. And Chris Traver, who is a Senior Policy Advisor at the Bureau of Justice Assistance at the Department of Justice. So I'm going to ask each of them to speak for 4 to 5 minutes about their perspective on budgetary and funding issues, and then we will go to questions. So I'm going to start with Steve.
Thank you, David, and certainly thanks to the Commission for inviting me to this workshop today. Bring up the slide deck, please. Thank you. Just real quick, I just wanted to go over some issues specifically addressing the potential for narrowbanding and some of the byproducts that can be some of the small wins that can come with narrowbanding at the state level with regard to some grant dollars and funding. So next slide, please. As an overview, it's really important for applicants to know what their state's interoperable vision is, what their SCIP plan speaks to, that their grant guidance is tied to their SCIP plan, so what the state's vision is, and what their grant guidance is. There's usually some opportunities there for, as the second bullet indicates, you might be able to acquire some narrowband radios and at the same time enhance your interoperability. So it's not necessarily I'm just trying to meet the FCC's narrowbanding mandate. I might actually be enhancing my interoperability by acquiring some narrowband radios and subsequently improving my interoperable quotient and having access to a number of resources that perhaps my wideband-only radio didn't have access to. And then lastly, the point of addressing some of the regional networks that are going on and agencies beginning to look outside the box rather than having their own specific system and their own specific radio and their own specific channel, perhaps participating in a regional system or a statewide system. They might have more resources, they might have less headaches, they might have less lightning strikes they have to worry about. They might actually have a higher functionality with maybe less monies, and maybe those narrowband dollars can be spent in a more productive manner. Next slide, please. The state SCIP plan has indicated it's a state's vision. The state is required to speak to that vision and to do outreach with its local agencies specifically on that. And we really think that there's a correlation between the grant guidance, and there should be, and DHS requires the grant guidance to speak to that. So if you can acquire narrowband radios and speak to some of your interoperability issues that the state has indicated as important, I think that really helps a grant application. It was mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to get agencies, some of the volunteer fire departments mentioned in the previous panel. We've identified those folks. If you can't get them to apply for money, it's very difficult to help them sometimes. And we've done a lot of that outreach, but knowing what the state's interoperable vision is a very important part of your grant application. And grant applications should try to tie those two things together. Next slide, please. In many instances, by going from a wideband-only radio to a narrowband radio, there are resources. For example, in the fire service, there are interoperability channels that are only wideband. There's actually additional interoperability channels that you can access in the narrowband mode. So there's an increase. There are VTAC national channels that are available in VHF that can be increased. Police Mutual Aid has additional channels that are narrowband only. So there is the definite correlation between narrowbanding and improving your interoperable capabilities or your interoperable quotient. And we really feel that the applicants should speak to that rather than just say, I want to meet the FCC's narrowbanding mandate. They should really highlight their interoperability improvements when they apply for grants. Next slide, please. And finally, we really feel it's important if regional systems and statewide systems can speak to user agencies that come on. The money they might spend on narrowbanding might be better spent on taking the radios they have, maybe upgrading them to operate in the trunk mode. Instead of having one channel, maybe they'll have 3 or 4 talk groups. Perhaps they'll have a wider sphere of operation, higher functionality. Maybe the dollars they would spend for their own radio network may be better spent on something that has a higher interoperability purpose to it, and perhaps a larger service area, and perhaps increase interoperability within our community. So I believe that's a summation slide at the end. Next slide, please. Basically, know your grants, know your grant language, know what the state's interoperability vision is. Acknowledge in your grant applications that by going to narrowband, I'm not just meeting the Commission's deadline, but I'm also improving my interoperability within my community, and then acknowledge regional systems that are ongoing because it may be a better deal for the local agency and have more functionality with the same costs as narrowbanding their own system. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Tim?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation. I want to take us back a little bit in time to January 26 of 1999. At that time, the nation faced a deadline. People looked at it and called it a thing called Y2K. The date was going to change. Things were going to happen. Things weren't going to work. And the sky was falling, some would say. At that time, people looked at that, and some people said, what do I have to do? Other people said, not my problem. Other people said, if I don't do anything, what'll happen? At the end of the day, on December 31st, as the ball fell in New York City, and it became the year 2000, it became an unevent. Because people had planned, people had answered the questions, and people had made the changes. And for those who didn't, probably the worst thing that happened was they sent out a bill that had the wrong date printed on it, or something of that nature. The impact was very minimal. On January 26, 2011, we face a date. We face a date that people are asking, why? Not me. Do I have to? And the date's sure. And it's going to come, it's going to happen, and we're going to go past it. And the question that has to be asked is, who's impacted? We've talked a lot in the previous group of people, and even in Steve's presentation, about the public safety community and about interoperability and about your neighbors. If they narrowband and I don't, what happens? I'd like to suggest to you that the impact of not completing this on time is not contained within the agencies that don't get it done, but is truly to all the people that live or visit that area that didn't get it done. Now, I would suggest to you that one of the things that has surfaced from the working group on narrowbanding that I chair is the fact that the elected officials in these jurisdictions have not taken ownership of this. They have looked at it, it's come across their tables, and they have said, well, that's nothing to do with us, and they hand it off to somebody else. And that's the furthest thing from the truth, because they are the ones who control the budgets. They are the ones who control the money. They are the ones who have to step up and realize this is our problem. Our problem. And we must look at it together with our agencies. It's got to be broad in scope. It's got to be everyone within their community that falls under their government jurisdiction looked at together. One of the things that concerns us in our working group is the fact that people who do not have funds available today are looking at this and saying, no funds, no planning, why should we? We can't get there. I would suggest to those people who might even be watching today, initiate your planning process today, because you cannot determine how much you need that you don't think you have till you finish your planning. And if you do not plan, when grant monies might come available, something might change, and you're not prepared, then you fail in the end. So I would truly ask you to plan. Our working group is currently in the process of drafting a series of articles. Our working group represents a broad stretch of the National Association spectrum of people that are involved in this problem and concerned about it. And we're drafting a set of articles, each one to be bylined by a member of that association, a member of that peer group, that talks about this narrowbanding effort. And the purpose of this set of articles that will be coming out from this month and months to come is to grab the attention of the elected people, to grab the attention of those who at the final end of the day make the decisions on the money, and get them to realize this is our problem and it affects everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Now we'll turn it over to Dan Fithian from DHS.
Thank you. Appreciate being invited here, and I do have a short slide presentation that I'm really going to zip through in the interest of time. Excuse me. The first slide really talks about narrowband funding challenges. Second slide, I mean, which of course we've already covered here. So turning ahead to the third slide, I should emphasize that really OEC itself, we don't actually administer grant programs. We don't cut checks. We appreciate the need for federal grant support for narrowbanding, but one of our primary missions is really to try and coordinate across all federal programs that do have grants or other financial support programs that support emergency communications, to try and better coordinate. We also work with our state and local stakeholders in developing grants policy, and again trying to coordinate those priorities sort of across the federal interagency. We have really been focusing on the federal side through the Emergency Communications Preparedness Center. We've set up a grants focus group where really for the first time kind of all the member agencies and departments that touch on emergency comms are better coordinating across their grant programs, and through that process we've really worked with the FCC to alert all the federal grant programs about the narrowbanding issues, about the impending deadlines, and really tried to emphasize that there's going to be a big uptick in demand for funding for these purposes, and to get ready for it, and really try and align programs for that, and we've been pretty successful in doing that. We also, through our annual, what we call our annual SAFECOM guidance, again working with state and local stakeholders, including Tim and many of the other folks in the room, we have heard from the state and local level. It's like, look, again, narrowbanding is a huge issue. Let's really start gearing up grant programs to get ready for that, and try and align them and build in more emphasis on narrowbanding issues and narrowbanding support across the federal interagency. So we've tried to do that. This year's SAFECOM guidance, again, there's a lot in there about narrowbanding that grantees can look to as they start preparing their applications for the upcoming fiscal year, once Congress really passes the appropriations and the fiscal year 11 grant programs are in place, and we've got some information. There's the website on the slide. In terms of some of the current programs, fiscal year 10 and earlier, that are currently supporting narrowbanding activities, again, there's a reminder on slide 4. of the fact that the Department of Commerce recently emphasized that if there are unexpended PSIC funds from the PSIC grants program, it's possible to reprogram some of those funds for narrowbanding efforts. And again, they put out FAQs and what have you. There's a website you can go to. Within the Department of Homeland Security, where our office is, we work very closely with FEMA as they administer grant programs. Very specifically, we kind of help them set policies for the Interoperable Emergency Communications Grant Program. It's pretty small, but it has already provided some support for narrowbanding activities, and there are other FEMA-administered grant programs that currently do support narrowbanding, and again, you can go to the FEMA website for more information on that. Looking ahead to slide 5, as we've looked through those current grant programs, you could see, earlier discussions, the previous panel, pretty much all of the activities that people need to engage in for narrowbanding, from planning to actual, equipment purchases and other hardware purchases. We're already seeing that some grantees are using current DHS funds for these purposes, and obviously over the next 2 years we'll be likely to do so even more. I want to close by just the last slide. There are again some important websites to keep in mind as again we look to the final passage of appropriations to the federal grant programs for fiscal year 11. We again have worked very closely with the FCC to make sure that their narrowbanding website identifies all the grant programs that look like they're going to be usable for support for narrowbanding. So keep an eye on the FCC's website, keep an eye on the FEMA website, and there's some other resources here. So I'm just coming up on my 5 minutes, and I'll look forward to questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And last but not least, Chris.
Thank you very much, and I as well appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you for a very brief period of time. And given the time constraints, I'll cut right to the chase here. Within the Department of Justice, there's several organizations that have a grant-making function. The one that I work for, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, provides the largest amount of funding direct to state, local, and tribal agencies. BJA basically has about $5 billion currently out in the wild, so to speak, being administered by our grant program managers. That number might be slightly inflated currently due to the Recovery Act issue coming the previous year, but nonetheless, it's a tremendous challenge for us from our standpoint, trying to manage and track the usage of all that funding. So it's really incumbent on us to do as much coordination as possible with the FCC, DHS, and some of our sister agencies within the Department of Justice, especially the National Institute of Justice and the COPS office, who are both represented here today. I want to just say a little bit about one of our biggest funding items, which is pretty much the premier source of funding for law enforcement and criminal justice, is the JAG program, which is our Justice Assistance Grant Program. In a typical year, the JAG program provides about $500 million to state and local agencies. That sounds like a lot of resources, but I'm going to explain two different ways how that number gets tremendously reduced by the time it reaches the local agency. On the one hand, it's divided among direct awards to states who then administer that piece of the JAG funds as they see fit. So only a portion of the JAG funding is administered directly at BJA that we can exert some influence over. And secondly, JAG has about 7 different programmatic categories of funding, only 2 of which, the law enforcement area and the planning, evaluation, and technology area, would really be applicable in the sense of supporting narrowbanding efforts. So the $500 million very quickly gets spread out among the country for various different efforts. It supports all facets of the criminal justice system in addition to equipment purchases, wireless capabilities, so it's in competition with a lot of other areas. Therefore, I'd really like to stress the importance that we're moving to and a lot of the department is moving to in terms of evidence-based practices. So it really comes down to how do we ensure that the projects that we fund, the agencies that we work with on a funding basis are making the best use of federal funds that are possible. And the way that we do that is make sure we have a high standard for funding that we put out there. All of our formula funding through the JAG program is administered by a state administering agent. DHS and other DOJ components have their own state administering agents. Sometimes they're the same individual, sometimes they're not, so coordination at the state level is key on that, but also coordination at the federal level as well to make sure we're putting the proper incentives and priority language into our grants to make sure they're used effectively. Because JAG is so open and diverse, it creates unique challenges in terms of supporting large-scale projects. So by the time the funding actually makes it to the local agency, it may only be a few $1,000s, or it may be not a whole lot of money. So for that reason, it's incredibly important to collaborate and work on regional partnerships, to pool resources, to work together with your region and your state, to make sure that the limited amount of resources that they do receive are used wisely and in support of critical issues such as narrowbanding. The other funding instrument at our disposal is on the discretionary side, which is our Burn Competitive program, and that's really where we have a large degree of capability in terms of programming funding for specific purposes. And this can go from anything to smart policing, to border issues, to what I focus on in information sharing, and all of that involves a technology component potentially. So our competitive process has been very rigorously defined to use external peer reviewers and must be carefully argued and supported in terms of the outcomes of that project. So I think that the key takeaway that I'd like to get across to you today is that the Department of Justice considers the narrowbanding effort extremely important. Since we have no specific programmed funding for the purpose of narrowbanding, but all of our funding streams are eligible or conducive to those efforts, it's really important to include that within your normal grant applications and really sell the case for why this is going to create enhancements or improvements in your environment. Make the case for the outcomes that are going to result from this capability as a part of your request, and that's the best possible way that I could recommend to get access to the very limited funding that we have at our disposal. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for sticking to your 5 minutes. I think we now have a full 10 minutes before we have to stop, so for questions and answers. And I have a few questions for the panel, but before I ask my questions, we do have a mic here, so if there's anybody in the audience that has a question for anybody on the panel, just step forward and we'll be happy to take it. But if no one steps forward, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and ask a couple of additional questions before we wind up. Let me start by asking, this is a question really for where I'd like to get a perspective both from Steve and Tim, kind of looking from a state perspective, and from Dan and Chris looking from a federal perspective, which is we've heard discussion about licensees sort of pooling their resources in order to look for funding, that there's an advantage to pulling your plans together in order to come up with some kind of more comprehensive regional proposal. Typically, though, that's also going to mean you're probably going to be seeking more funding for the entirety, for the project, perhaps, than an individual licensee might seek just to narrowband their own individual system. So how do we deal with that if what we really want as a policy matter is to have these issues addressed at a at a regional level, and to have licensees try to pool their resources, if ultimately that's also going to mean a bigger ask when it comes to funding? I'm just curious about folks' perspective on that.
I'll take just one stab at it. One of the things that we found is quite often it's an ongoing initiative that those agencies can join or participate in that might give them a little more bang for their buck, and it may be on a regional basis, and it may be a number of agencies doing so. We have seen some instances where all of the fire, police, and EMS within a certain county have decided to band together, but in the end, I think what a lot of them are realizing is unless that system provides them a greater amount of return, in the end they're going from the channel this wide to a channel this wide, and they don't really see a whole lot in return there. So in our instance, the state's building a statewide network. Many in VHF, many want to participate on that because they feel they'll get more in return than what they would if they just spent their own individual agencies narrowbanding. So.
My response to that would be that truthfully, over the last several years, there's been a tremendous emphasis on doing things regionally in these groups, so that is a comfortable area thing. It's certainly, in the state of Nebraska, certainly when we would go and speak to NEMA there, who administers the grants through them, we better come as a region. We better come as a group that's pulled together and make the presentation. The other thing that does is if that's presented, even though the dollars would be higher, it ensures the interoperability among the regions. So you don't end up with an island sitting out there that didn't make it. And so my personal opinion is that I think the regional approach of people pulling together is the way to go.
From my end, I would second what Chris said earlier, which is certainly OEC encourages people to coordinate closely with their SAA, the statewide administrative agency, with the statewide interoperability coordinators, the SWICs, and certainly any grant programs that OEC influences directly or indirectly. We encourage that type of statewide coordination. As far as the ability to actually get sort of regional grants, it will vary by the grant program. Some certainly allow that, some actually encourage that. So I guess the other piece of advice is collaborate closely with the program officers of the various grant programs and kind of see how to position it best. So I mean it's certainly the case that this type of regional approach, collective approach, takes more coordination and collaboration, but again, as you've heard, I think it can certainly pay off, and it's probably consistent with the the FCC's kind of the whole concept of narrowbanding, that it certainly doesn't stop within a particular jurisdiction, the impacts and benefits.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to those very good comments are, as I alluded to, the level of competition for grants is getting higher and higher as state and local budgets shrink. And so the bar needs to be set higher. And one of the things that regional coordination helps us do as grant-making decision makers is giving us a level of assurance that a lot of the planning activities and the coming together of those agencies in a lot of cases has already occurred, and they're just waiting for the funds to execute. That gives us a lot higher degree of confidence that we're going to be funding the right types of organizations as opposed to maybe one that comes in and hasn't done that planning piece yet or hasn't reached out to its adjacent agencies. So we look highly upon that as a factor.
One more thing, too, I think it's important on the applicant, and it's really their responsibility to find out how their state distributes money. My state, as an example, for their HSGP dollars, they push all that money out to the regions, and they say, here's your list of priorities, and if they want to spend every last cent of that on interoperable communications, and they all agree to do so, they can do so. So it's important for the applicant to understand how the state distributes the monies that are out there. A lot of times they don't think they can get it, so they don't want to investigate what the process is, and I think they're doing themselves a disservice in that part. So. Plus, there's Fire Act money. There's a slew of grants out there. The applicant really needs to educate themselves as to where that money can be had. Spend a little bit of that energy. I think they'll get a lot in return for it. So.
Let me ask a question about the calendar and budget cycles. We're in January 2011. The deadline is January 2013, a little less than 24 months from now. Dan, you mentioned that there may be even opportunities with grants that have already been given out if funds have been not been fully expended, that some of that money might be able to be directed to narrowbanding. But from a licensee perspective, how should licensees that are looking for funding be looking at the next 24 months from a kind of budgetary cycle point of view, both in terms of going to their local governments and state governments and also trying to procure federal grant dollars, both whether we're talking about fiscal year 2011 or fiscal year 2012? And if everybody could just address that briefly.
Well, I guess I'll start here and say that obviously as we mentioned, planning is critical, and planning early is especially critical. I know our time frames, by the time we get our budget through down from DOJ and from Congress, quite a bit of the fiscal year has already passed, and by the time that money actually gets awarded, it can often be almost the entire fiscal year by the time they actually receive the money. And then generally we run at about 12 or 18-month periods of performance for those grants. So we're talking about activities that are happening 2 to 2.5 years out for the current cycle. So planning early and getting your thinking together about where the funding is going to come from, what sources you can look at as early as possible is critical.
Well, again, I think our advice would be, prepare as much in advance. Obviously, all of us, federal agencies and grantees are kind of at the mercy of the appropriations, cycle. But there are certain things you could do in advance. Again, sort of check for, what are the likely grant programs that could be available. Our SAFECOM 11 guidance, fiscal year 11 recommendations for grantees are out and posted on the SAFECOM site. We have, with FEMA, we have, draft fiscal year 11 guidance, kind of queued up and ready to go. And for a lot of, at least the DHS grant programs, once appropriations are passed, that sets a pretty rigorous timeline for when the formal guidance has to be released. In many cases, it's within a month. There's then a window during which people can apply for it. There's a certain period of time for review of the applications, and then grants have to be awarded by a certain time frame. So it's at least on most of the DHS grant programs that are relevant to emergency comms, there's it's the clock starts with the passage of appropriations. So I guess pay attention to that, and then start working. Hopefully you've done some of this collaboration ahead of time, and kind of know what programs you're gonna to look to file applications. And on the Fed end, we have a pretty rigorous timeline for meeting our part of that obligation.
I think I have to reiterate something I've said earlier, that it's just absolutely urgent that the planning be done. I think these two gentlemen have both placed the emphasis on the fact that when grant monies are made available, the window, once the word comes out and says, okay, this is it, the window to apply for those is very short, very short. And if you haven't planned, then there is no opportunity. So the planning has to start right now and be ready. So when those opportunities come, it's just a matter of taking that planning and getting it into the appropriate application wordage. And every week, every day that passes puts you greater in jeopardy that when an opportunity comes, you'll not be able to take advantage of it if you're not planning.
And I think the first part of planning is finding out what you have, whether what you have can be upgraded. Certainly upgrading is a preferable expense than replacement. And there are many folks out there who have radios that are narrowband capable or operating in the wideband mode. They need to, at some point, they're going to be a crunch on the people who can actually do that programming for them. Most of the smaller departments have radio shops that do work for them. They don't have their own radio people. So at some point, if they wait too long, they're going to be in contention with other agencies trying to get both public safety and non-public safety folks trying to get their radios reprogrammed. So it's in their best interest to find out what they have and whether that needs to be replaced, whether it needs to be reprogrammed, and the sooner the better.
All right, thank you. Well, it is 3 o'clock, and so unfortunately we could, I'm sure, discuss this topic for quite a lot longer, but we're out of time. I would like to thank all of the panelists for their very insightful contributions. The workshop will be, I guess a video file of the workshop will be posted on our website, though it may be a day or two before we get it up, given the impending weather. And we look forward to continuing to work with you and the public safety community on meeting the challenge of the narrowbanding deadline in 2013. So thank you, everyone, and safe travels wherever you are headed today. Thank you.